Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we have another aircraft review, and somewhat surprisingly we'll be looking at yet another Piper Arrow 3. This one of course is the Carenado Piper Arrow 3. As I'm sure that most of you are aware, it actually released before the Just Flight Piper Arrow. However, I wanted to wait until both products had released before reviewing each of them, primarily in anticipation of the Just Flight Arrow being the superior product. And reviewing the products in this order of course allows you to compare the differences between the two. That being said, the aim of today's review is not to draw direct comparisons between both versions of the Piper Arrow. I'll leave you to do that for yourselves. So in today's video we'll be reviewing the Carenado Piper Arrow 3 based entirely on its own merits. For our flight today we're currently on the ground here at John Wayne Orange County Airport, and we're going to take the Arrow on a quick hop over the water towards Catalina Island. As always guys, I do hope you enjoy the video and find it useful. If you do, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you have any comments or questions for me, please leave them down in the comment section below. But now let's start our review by taking a closer look at the exterior of the aircraft. So I'm sure by now quite a few of you are very familiar with how all of this works. Being a Carenado product, we're certainly expecting the exterior of the model to be of a very high quality. And the Carenado Arrow 3 is absolutely no exception. Once again, the aircraft has been modelled to a very high standard. All of the proportions look really nice, and the rendering and the PBR effects look absolutely top notch. As usual, we get all of the external equipment that we've come to expect from a Microsoft Flight Simulator Carenado add-on. We have our chocks, our external power unit, our tow bar, and our engine intake covers. All of which, again as usual, can be accessed from the in-cockpit iPad. Once again, all of the modelling and texturing on the aircraft holds up extremely well, even when viewed at very close level. And the same goes for the cockpit. They've done a really nice job with that, both internally and externally. You can just see the iPad on the left-hand yoke. There is a bit of flickering from the iPad screen when viewed externally, but personally I think this is a very minor detail. And again, as you can see here with the landing gear, the absolutely top-notch level of attention to detail is displayed throughout the aircraft. You can see that Carenado have done a really nice job modelling the landing gear as well as the wheel well. So once again, an absolutely sterling effort from Carenado with the external model of the aircraft. They never really failed to deliver in this department, and I think it's fair to say that they're still right up there with the very best when it comes to visual modelling within Microsoft Flight Simulator. So that's the externals of the aircraft. Let's now head inside the cockpit and get a bit of a feel for what they've done in there. So welcome once again to the cockpit of the Piper Arrow 3. As you can see, a little bit of a change of scenery for you this time, as we are of course in the Carenado Piper Arrow. As you can see, it's a little bit windy, a little bit noisy outside, so we'll just get the aircraft door closed up before we continue, just to quieten things down a little bit. Worth noting, the top latch on the cockpit door is not actually modelled. Anyway, in the Carenado Arrow, as I said, and as you can see for yourselves, the Carenado Arrow is a little bit more modern, both in terms of its aesthetics and styling, as well as to some degree its avionics. Once again, typical for a Carenado model, everything is modelled to a really high standard. The texturing is also done in very fine detail as well. Everything looks really nice, the textures hold up very well, even when zoomed in. And again, overall a really nice job from Carenado, both in terms of the modelling and the texturing, both internally and externally. No big surprise there though. Of course what we're really interested to find out for ourselves is how well the aircraft actually flies, how it feels, how it handles. So we'll get the aircraft started up and we'll be on our way. The before start checklist then, the pre-flight inspection has been completed. Passenger briefing is not required. Seatbelts and shoulder harnesses are secure. Circuit breakers are checked in. Avionics master is off. Landing gear lever is down. And the brakes are tested and set. Fuel tank, we're currently on the left tank, we'll leave it on the left tank for the start. For the start itself, the mixture is in the idle cutoff position. Propeller is in the high RPM position. Throttle will open about 1/4 of an inch. The beacon, the checklist calls for the beacon to come on. The aircraft isn't actually fitted with a rotating beacon, which seems to be a little bit of a feature of modern Piper aircraft. It's not really something I'm familiar with, but anyway, as I understand it, if we leave the fin strobe light on, that's essentially the same thing. Turn the nav lights on as well. Master switch can come on, as can the alternator. Fuel pump can go on. We'll move the mixture into the fully rich position. We have our rise in fuel flow, so mixture back to idle cutoff. Fuel pump off. Checking that the propeller area is clear, which it is. He's probably going to be in the way in just a moment, so we'll give him a bit of a shout. Not that he'll listen, of course. Clear prop! You can hear a change in sound there when we open the DV window, so that's quite nice. And ready to start the engine, so we'll engage the starter. So bring the mixture in. And we have a good start, so bring the mixture up. So mixture's fully rich. Idling, we'll just bring the power back slightly to idle around 1200 RPM. Oil pressure has come up into the green, although you'll notice a little bit of a bug there as it was showing in the green before we even started the engine. We'll leave the mixture in the rich position. Load meter only showing a couple of amps there, so we're within limits. Flaps are retracted. Avionics master can come on. Transponder will set to standby. Heading indicator was showing about 347 on the HSI there. About 345 on the compass. Altimeter, so we'll grab the ATIS. It's 1260.
John Wayne Airport information Alpha 16000. Wind 237 at 7. Visibility 10. Sky condition, few clouds at 500 feet, few clouds at 4,100 feet, few clouds at 12,000 feet. Temperature 15. Dew point 10. QNH tree 0.16. Visual runway 20 left and ILS runway 20 right in use. Landing and departing runway 20 left and runway 20 right. DSR aircraft, say direction of flight. All aircraft read back hold short instructions. Advise controller, on initial contact, you have Alpha.
Okay, so they're using the southerly runways, which is great for us as we're basically wanting to depart out to the south. A little bit of a crosswind from the right by the sounds of it. Set the altimeter. And just before we request taxi, we'll set the heading bug and the CDI up for the departure. So they're using runway 20, we'll set the heading bug on runway heading. So that's roughly a heading of 200. And we'll be departing out on a course of 228, so we'll set the CDI for that. We're tracking inbound to the Santa Catalina VOR, which is 111.4. So we'll tune that up now. And you can see we're already picking up the VOR actually. Anyway, we're now ready for the taxi, so we'll call up ground. We'll request a taxi for departure out to the south.
John Wayne Ground Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra with Alpha request taxi to the active south departure.
Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra taxi to in hold short of runway 20 right via taxiway Bravo Lima. Contact tower on 128.3, when ready.
Taxiing hold short runway 20 right via taxiway Bravo Lima Tango Bravo Sierra.
Okay, so she's given us runway 20 right, which is great for us as that's the runway that's closer to us. Park brake can come off. The aircraft doesn't really want to move at 1200 RPM and in fact seems to need quite a bit of power to get moving there. I don't know about you guys, but I have to say I'm not too impressed by the engine sound so far. They sound a little bit generic to me. It's a bit of a low humming sound which doesn't really sound much like a PA28. We'll clear out on the right. We'll take the intersection here just in front of us just to keep the taxi time down for the video today. Looking at the windsock, the wind's more or less out from the west, so we'll get ourselves turned around into wind for the run-up. According to the Carenado product information, the sounds for the aircraft were actually recorded from a real-world PA28R, but certainly I don't think they sound an awful lot like one. In terms of taxiing, the aircraft feels very nice, it's very responsive, very smooth. So we're into wind, park brake can come on. Just bring the engine up to idle again around 1200 RPM. So for the run-up checklist, the nose wheel is straight, the brakes are set and holding. Flight controls. Are full free and in the correct sense. Fuel selector, we'll change over to the right tank now. Mixture is fully rich. We'll come up to 2000 RPM for the run-up. I think the engine sounds a little bit better at high power settings, but again, still a little bit generic overall. Anyway, it's 2000 RPM. Check the magnetos. So there's the left magneto. As you can see, we have about 100 RPM drop on the left, back to both. And checking the right. You get about 100 RPM drop there. And back to both. So magnetos are within limits. We'll cycle the propeller. As you can see, there's absolutely no change in RPM when we cycle the propeller controls there, so that's a pretty big bug with the add-on currently. We'll come back up to full RPM. Checking the engine T's and P's, so oil pressure's in the green, oil temperature's in the green. EGT looking good, ammeter looks good. Suction is checked. And we have no annunciator lights, we'll just check the annunciator panel. So everything looking good there apart from the propeller RPM controls, which, as I said, is a pretty significant bug. Anyway, coming back to idle. And idling around 800, 750 RPM there, so that's checked. We'll come back up to 1200 RPM. And continuing with the checklist, the throttle friction nut is set, communications radios are set, navigations radios are set, flight instruments are checked, fuel quantities, we have about 18 gallons in each tank and the tanks are balanced, elevator and rudder trim are set for takeoff, autopilot, we'll turn that on now, we might use that a little bit during the cruise, flaps, we'll take flaps 10 for the takeoff. Cabin doors and windows are secure. Seats are adjusted and locked. Departure briefing, so we're departing off runway 20 right, basically departing out on runway heading. Once we have a positive climb, we'll get the gear up. 300 feet, we'll take the flaps up. 500 feet, we'll come back to climb power. Rotate speed today will be 57 knots, and we'll be climbing away at 90 knots once we have the gear up. Climbing up to an altitude of 1,000 feet, just to avoid the relatively low cloud base this morning. So we are now ready for the takeoff. Just before we call for takeoff, we'll turn the fuel pump on, landing light on, strobe lights can come on, as can the pitot heat. We'll set our transponder to out, and we'll note the time. It's currently just coming up on 19, so we'll call it 20 for the nav log. Change over to tower now.
John Wayne Tower Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra at runway 20 right, ready for takeoff south departure.
Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra cleared for takeoff runway 20 right departure to the south approved.
Okay, clear for takeoff 20 right, it's all clear on final. Let's clear up wind as well.
Cleared for takeoff runway 20 right, Tango Bravo Sierra.
Again, the aircraft feels pretty sticky on the ground, it takes quite a bit of power to get moving. Wind out from the right. So let's get going, coming up to full power. I think the engine sounds a little bit better at high power settings, but still not great. Rudder feels good, power's set, manifold pressure and RPM look good, T's and P's are in the green. Coming back on the yoke. Aircraft feels pretty heavy in pitch. I've got almost full backstick there, probably about 2/3, 3/4. Anyway, it's positive climb, tapping the brakes, gear up. So putting in quite a bit of trim, start easing off on those control forces. I've got quite a lot of rudder on here to account for that crosswind, and the skin slip indicator still showing completely central at the moment. That's now 0 rudder, so you can see the aircraft isn't affected much by rudder input.
Tango Bravo Sierra, continue for south departure. I will contact you next when you leave my airspace.
Through 300 feet, so flaps up.
John Wayne Tower Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra, continue for south departure.
And we're through 500 feet now, climbing away nicely at 90 knots, so we'll come onto our departure track. And we'll come back to 25 inches on the manifold pressure and 2500 on the RPM. Leveling off at 1000 feet as I mentioned. And the propeller controls do seem to be working now. So I presume that the prop is not currently modelled very accurately on the Carenado Arrow. I have to say that the aircraft's very nice to fly, it's very smooth, very responsive. Easy to trim. We'll get ourselves trimmed out. Maintain a heading of around 230 until we intercept the course inbound to the VOR. We'll get the Santa Catalina VOR identified. Come back to our cruise power setting now, so 2200 on the manifold pressure, and we'll set about 2300 RPM. Yeah, the prop controls definitely need some work. I've got almost full course on the pitch there.
Leaving my airspace, frequency change approved.
John Wayne Tower Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra, frequency change.
Yeah, I've got the prop lever almost fully in the course position there, and you can see we're only just getting 2300 RPM, so I think the prop is currently modelled slightly incorrectly, as I said. Anyway, we'll test out the autopilot, so that can go on. And we'll set heading and out. We'll tune up the SoCal approach 1213. Very short leg over today, it's only around 30 miles as you can see, but we'll request a flight following anyway.
SoCal approach Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra is type 7 miles southwest of John Wayne. Request flight following.
Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra, SoCal approach. Squawk 0657.
Squawk 0657 Tango Bravo Sierra.
Tango Bravo Sierra, radar contact 8 miles southwest of John Wayne, 1000 feet. QNH 30.16.
Copy Tango Bravo Sierra.
Okay, so altimeter's good, autopilot seems to be doing a nice job so far. We'll just track in towards the radial and then we'll try the Nav Hold function, as I know on some previous Carenado aircraft that wasn't working particularly well. So I've got 22 inches on the manifold pressure, 2300 on the RPM. That's giving us a fuel flow of around just below 10 US gallons an hour, which seems pretty accurate. Cruise speed's just over 120 knots, which again seems pretty good. T's and P's are in the green. Don't seem to be getting anything in terms of the nav identifier for the VOR currently. But overall the aircraft, as I said, very pleasant to fly and seems to behave broadly by the numbers. It does feel slightly heavy in pitch, but again, I've not flown the Arrow, so that may well be true to life. Just come slightly left of track just to intercept this radial a little bit more quickly so that we can test out the Nav Hold function. And as you saw, now we're in the cruise, I'll turn the fuel pump and the landing light off as well. So cruise checklist, propeller is set, throttle is set, fuel pump is off, lights are set as required, mixture will leave rich, fuel selector will leave on the right tank until we come to our top of descent. Only going to be in the cruise for about 15 minutes. And the heading indicator, we're showing about 215 and about 210 on the compass. You can already see Catalina Island off the nose, so obviously we can navigate quite happily visually today. Worth noting that the DME is currently showing grossly incorrectly there. You can see it showing a ground speed of 2 knots, therefore of course giving us a grossly inaccurate time. I noticed that was a bug as well on the Carenado Waco. So that's a little bit disappointing to see. They've repeated the same bug in their next product as well. Hopefully that'll get fixed in the next update. Anyway, just coming onto the radial now. We'll just wait until we are actually on the radial itself to arm the nav mode of the autopilot. So a few little bugs with the aircraft so far, as we've seen, which unfortunately does tend to be rather typical for a Carenado product. I will say though that they have been pretty good so far with their Microsoft Flight Simulator products in terms of fixing bugs with updates, so I don't mind a few bugs here and there as long as they are fixed in relatively quick course. Another thing I noticed is the temperature gauge up on the windshield here is pretty much impossible to read in these lighting conditions, so it'd be nice to see that get brightened up a little bit somehow. Pretty short time in the cruise, as I said. We're going to be in the cruise for about another 8 minutes or so. So we'll quickly head outside the aircraft, we'll take a look at some external views in the cruise, you can get a feel for the engine sounds outside as well, and then we'll come back just before we start our descent into Catalina. So welcome back to the cockpit of the Carenado Piper Arrow 3. As you'll see from the external shots, once again the model is absolutely beautiful, but the sounds I think are a little bit off. Anyway, we've been making our way towards Catalina Island, and luckily for us the weather has opened up a little bit over the islands. We managed to climb up to an altitude of 2,500 feet, which is good because the aerodrome elevation itself is around 1,600 feet. You might just about be able to make the runway out off in the distance there. We tried the nav mode, tracking the VOR radial inbound towards the field, and that seemed to work very well. And I now have the GPS driving the CDI, and once again the aircraft's tracking very nicely there. So overall, all of the systems in the aircraft do seem to work pretty well. The heading bug does seem to have a little bit of an issue where if you make a large heading change, the aircraft will turn onto the heading, overshoot, and then end up hunting around a little bit for the heading. Anyway, we've just cancelled our flight following, we're squawking 1200 again now. We've tuned up Catalina traffic on 1227, and we'll make a position report.
Kilo Alpha Victor X-ray traffic Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra 6 miles northeast 2,500 feet inbound to land runway 22.
So we're coming on runway 22, as you just heard. That's more or less straight into wind, and luckily for us it's pretty much a direct-in approach as well. We'll run the descent checklist before we start getting busy. So ATIS has been obtained, altimeter is set, passenger briefing is not required, mixture is rich, throttle and propeller are set as required, landing light can come on, and we'll change over the fuel tanks as well for the arrival. We burned through about 3 gallons on the right tank, which is roughly what you'd expect, and we'll leave the fuel pump on anyway, as we'll do our downwind checks now. So brakes are off and checked. Just take out the autopilot, undercarriage can come down. So undercarriage is down, 3 greens, mixture is rich. Fuel pump is on, fuel quantities are sufficient. Instruments are checked. We'll start reducing our speed. And landing light is on, harness is secure. Call final now on traffic.
Kilo Alpha Victor X-ray traffic Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra is on final runway 22 to land.
Take stage flap. Overall, I have to say the aircraft is very pleasant to fly. It's very smooth, very responsive, as I said. The trim is perhaps a touch sensitive at times. So we'll come back further on the manifold pressure. We'll start really reducing that speed now. Take another stage of flap. Obviously the extra drag will help get the speed back and get us back on profile as well. Now we'll go full flaps now. So pitch, full fine, undercarriage is down, 3 greens, flaps are set, landing clearance is not required, and the runway is clear. We'll try and take the first exit on the left if we can. A little bit of sink here off the hills, so coming back up on the power. We can get on profile now. We're going to try and land nearer towards the threshold, so we'll be a bit low on the PAPI. As I say, we want to come off the first exit if we can. Minimise our time on the runway. So, flaring the aircraft. A little bit high there on the flare. Holding her off. Touchdown. Come on the brakes as quick as we can. Getting the aircraft slowed down to exit. Not too bad landing overall. The aircraft feels reasonable in the flare. It perhaps feels like it's not giving you as much feedback as you would expect. You sort of don't quite know when you're going to sink down onto the runway. Anyway, we're all clear. We'll call clear of the runway.
Kilo Alpha Victor X-ray traffic Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra is clear of the runway.
Seems to be an abundance of arrows around. We've got one on the left, one on the right. Get the flaps up. Fuel pump, landing light, strobes, recognition light and pitot heat can come off. Transponder can go off as well. There's the competition out on our right. So I'll bring the aircraft to a stop. Part brake on. Back up to 1200 RPM on the throttle. And the after landing checklist, wing flaps are up, mixture is rich, fuel pump is off, landing light is off, navigation lights will leave on, transponder is off, and the taxi clearance wasn't required. Securing the aeroplane, avionics master can come off, throttle is at 1200 RPM, mixture can come to idle cutoff. And we have a good shutdown. Nice shutdown noises, I have to say. Anyway, throttle back to idle, ignition off. And the master switch can go off. I'll just crack open the door. And welcome to a rather windy but altogether fairly pleasant day on Catalina Island. So I hope you enjoyed our little trip over to Catalina Island in the Carenado Piper Arrow 3 this morning. Hopefully it gave you a good feel for what the product is about, what its strengths and weaknesses are. As usual, I'll just give you a brief rundown of my opinions on the aircraft. We'll start with the negatives. Obviously we picked up a few bugs and system inaccuracies as we went through the flight there, most of which are fairly minor and somewhat forgivable, things that you could certainly wait to be updated in a patch. For example, the oil pressure gauge, or the aircraft hunting around a little bit for the heading bug when on autopilot. Which, to be fair, I have seen happen in other add-on aircraft as well. Unfortunately though, the Carenado Arrow does have a couple of fairly significant issues as well. The main one for me being the propeller control, as we saw during the run-up. That seemed to be completely inaccurate. I've never flown an Arrow in the real world, but it would certainly be my expectation, and the checklist would seem to indicate that when running the engine at 2000 RPM during the run-up, we should have seen a fairly significant change in RPM when exercising the prop control lever. So as I say, for me that's a pretty significant and pretty disappointing bug to see. A couple of other issues that didn't really impress me with the aircraft. One would certainly be the sound. As we discussed during the review, I think that the engine sounds, at least to my ear, sound quite generic. There also didn't seem to be a whole lot of change in engine sound when coming up and down on the throttle. I also thought that the ground handling seemed to be a little bit off there, as I said, with the aircraft needing quite a lot of power to get moving. My last significant negative point for the Carenado Arrow: the aircraft is quite FPS hungry, I have to say. I found that when comparing it with the default Cessna 152, I was getting nearly 20 FPS less in the Carenado Arrow 3, which of course in a simulator that's already very difficult to run on a lot of systems is a really significant impact. So overall, definitely a few areas of disappointment with the Carenado Piper Arrow 3. That being said, it's certainly not all bad. There was some things that I also quite enjoyed about the aircraft. Obviously, once again, the modelling and the texturing is absolutely top notch. This area is obviously Carenado's forte, and once again they haven't let us down in that department. The aircraft does look a little bit like a clone of their Piper Seminole, but that's somewhat to be expected as the aircraft do share a lot of similarities in real life, and personally that doesn't bother me very much anyway. Similarly, with the exception of the engine sounds, I think that Carenado have done quite a nice job recreating the ambience in the cockpit. I wouldn't say that I necessarily have a preference one way or another in this case, but it was nice flying a slicker, slightly more modern version of the aircraft, and overall I quite enjoyed the cockpit setup in terms of its styling and its avionics. Another thing I quite liked about the Carenado Arrow: the performance seems to be broadly on the numbers. Cruise speed, climb performance and fuel burn all seem to be within the correct ballpark, which is nice to see from an add-on that's ultimately at the lower end of the cost spectrum. Similarly, overall the flight modelling wasn't too bad, certainly still towards the default aircraft end of the spectrum. The aircraft was very pleasant to fly, very smooth, very responsive as I said, and I did try a couple of stalls and the aircraft does seem to respond broadly as you would expect. And again, I was pleasantly surprised, it somewhat surpassed my expectations. Lastly, of course, there is the price. Obviously the Carenado option is significantly cheaper than the competition, but frankly, overall I think you're getting what you pay for. In summary, I did really enjoy my flight out in the Carenado Piper Arrow 3. I do think that it's still a nice little aircraft from Carenado, although of course it does have some significant issues that need sorting. If you're someone that's looking for another reasonably cost-effective option to expand your hangar within Microsoft Flight Simulator, then I think that the Carenado Piper Arrow 3 is worth a look. As I say, it does do quite a few things well, and it is a nice aircraft to fly. Certainly you'll have yet another very pretty model to take up into the skies within the sim. However, if you're only looking to get one rendition of the Piper Arrow 3, and I suspect that most of you are, particularly if your interest in flight simulation lie more towards the side of accuracy, in-depth systems modelling and a decent flight model, then I would probably suggest that you save your money on this one and go and look elsewhere, if you catch my drift. Anyway guys, as always, I do hope that you enjoyed the video and found it useful. If you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you have any comments or questions for me, please leave them down in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. But for now, thanks very much, and I'll see you all again soon.